Welcome to session 4 of our DVA series, where we will be considering the role of the DVA and their ability to create and sustain value from data analytics and AI investments. And today we'll be covering the career pivot into the data value architect role. The idea for today is to show you what it takes to become a DVA from a foundational perspective if you're considering a career change. Something that I want to just mention here, as well as we're going to be mentioning it towards the end, is don't just assume the role of DVA if you are not equipped to be a DVA yet, or if you don't have the mandate and support that you need from senior management to realize the value from data analytics investments. And as per usual, Mags is going to share her weekly reality check with us just to make sure that we don't get caught up in hype and that we focus on what's actually happening in practice. Mags, what's our opening hook for today?
Sure, John. I've listened to all the different things we've been saying the past 3 weeks, and I've realized often people try, when they go into a new role, they try and upskill hectically and get the one accreditation after the other and get these certificates after the other. What I've been realizing is that that's not the right way to do it. That's actually thinking about it. What the people are in a DVA role doesn't need all these accreditations. And especially with the AI that we have today, we can't stay abreast with all the technology. It's now you're going to run around like a mad horse and trying to get all these accreditations. It's about the judgment, getting that skill of judgment and actually getting the value out of the data, making sure you build on that skill, the commercial sense to see actually what is it that's in that solution. Rather, it's about being solution driven and value driven, and having that value discipline for the organization to drive that value absolutely. So it's not about all these stacking up the skills. I would say it's about judgment, commercial sense, and value discipline. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Mag. So I think the important bit here, just to reiterate, is that it's not just chasing the hype and the new technologies and the certifications and accreditations and, you put your Amazon 10x certified. I don't really know what that means to anyone in any, right mind and sense. But I think the core bit is once you start focusing on those three things that Mags has mentioned, and building judgment, commercial sense, and value discipline, that's really what organizations are looking for, specifically in the sense of a DVA. In the role of a data architect or an engineer or something like it might look different. And then, for instance, certifications might be something important. But if you're focusing on value, your focus should shift from just technical stuff more towards business impact.
Absolutely.
Now, for today's conversation, one of the key things that we want to unpack, because this is the question that we've been asked quite a lot over the last couple of months, is how do you now pivot into the role of a DVA if you're already in an existing field or profession within the industry? And this morning, we want to sort of look at three main pivot tracks. The one is pivoting from a data analytics professional perspective. So whether you're a data engineer, data architect, data analytics leader, chief data analytics officer, whatever it might be, anything with the focus on data from a technical perspective, that would be pivot number one. Pivot number two is if you're somebody that works in finance, either if you're doing it from a secondary sense, or even if you're somebody like a CFO, finance business partner, financial director, or even an actuary or somebody that's really focusing on the financial side of business. How do you then pivot into the role of DVA a bit more formally? That also, obviously, by association, also means all chartered accountants. I think there's a very nice way for them to also pivot into the role of a DVA and not just in a traditional sense end up in a finance role in their careers. And then pivot track number three is typically let's call it your business, right? So the people that's working in business operations on the product side of the business or on the strategy side of business, and what are the things that they need to look at in order to complement what they already know so that they can focus on sort of shifting towards become a data value architect. Now, as we unpack these three main pivot tracks, I suggest you take notes, make notes, or make a mental note and come back to listen to certain parts of the session. But what I really want to do is highlight almost the three critical areas that you need to add to your knowledge base for each one of these in order to make the formal pivot into the role of a data value architect. And then once I'm done with that, we're going to go into just a bit of the skill stack. We're going to look at 10 odd things that you need to add to your skills. So if you're looking at if a plumber walks up to your house and they have their toolkit with them, you sort of know what would be in a plumber's toolkit. The same with somebody that comes in, that's an electrician, they will come in with electrical tools, right? You won't find a plumber pitching up to your house with electrical tools, and you won't find an electrician pitching up with plumbing accessories and tools, right? So the DVA needs to make sure that they've got the right tools in their tool set, and we'll be going through sort of what that is in a bit more detail. So the first main pivot track is moving from a data analytics profession into that of a data value architect. Now, there's three things that you need to add from a knowledge base perspective. The first one is the financial lens, or the finance lens. Is really important to start thinking about what you're doing from an input versus output perspective, but specifically with your finance hat on. So if I'm investing in data analytics, I'm expecting a return on that investment. What does that look like? How do I measure it? The second thing that you can add to your knowledge base as a data analytics professional is your stakeholder alignment, right? It's something that's a bit more difficult, specifically if you're working in highly complex or highly segregated environments where there's a lot of silos and areas of excellence where people don't typically try to cross borders, or they're not allowed to cross borders for whatever the reason might be, but getting stakeholders aligned, right? So in that instance, it would look something like you being able to pull in your data and your business colleagues and being able to orchestrate value between those three environments. And then the third one is around the context of benefits tracking. Now, this is probably the most difficult pivot for data analytics leaders, is getting to that point where you're tracking benefits from the investments that you've made and not focusing on what the technical stuff tells you to do, right? So for instance, but if we do this, we can run near real-time queries. We can now process 100 million rows per second. This is going to be the throughput. We can store the stuff. We can encrypt it. We can do all sorts of fancy things. Unfortunately, in the world of DVA, that means diddly squat. You need to focus on how do you add value. So just to sum that up, for data analytics professional, three things to add to your knowledge base. Adding a finance lens, looking at everything from a financial perspective. Secondly, is looking at everything from a stakeholder alignment point of view. So you're making sure that your stakeholders are aligned in terms of what needs to happen. And then just thirdly on that one is being able to track benefits from the work that you are doing, all the investments that you from a data analytics team are making. The second one is that of finance. If you in any finance role of some sorts, the three things that you need to add to your knowledge base, firstly, is to understand the data lifecycle. Now, this is a very important bit, because once you start focusing on how data can create value for you, one of those things is data also has a certain value within a certain window or period of time as well. So you need to understand how data gets created, where the data gets created, how it gets maintained throughout its life cycle, and ultimately ends up being archived or destroyed at the end of the day. The second component that you need to understand from a finance point of view is also the analytics basics, right? You need to understand what data analytics is. You need to understand what the fundamentals of AI is and how those things interrelate to one another and what the connections there are. You need to understand what the concept of a data platform is, and data harmonization and master data management and all these type of things. So really understanding the basics around analytics and what it can do for you. You don't need to understand it in a technical perspective. You need to know it from a value orchestration point of view. The third one then there from a finance lens or perspective would be is product thinking, right? So thinking about how do you build things or orchestrate things within your environment from the viewpoint of a product, right? So if you're building things, a lot of people talk about data products, and sometimes people say, but a data product is we built this analytical model and we've deployed it and now it's a product. Yeah, that's not unfortunately how products work. Products have also a life cycle. Products are complex to build and package. Products need to have profitability linked to it. Products need to have impact. So your product either needs to increase revenue, decrease cost, manage organizational risk, or increase operational efficiency, right? So those are the three things that you need to focus on from a finance point of view: is understanding the data life cycle, basic understanding of data analytics and AI, as well as then the third component there around product thinking. Now, the last one is a bit more of I think so. If we say from a data pivot to DVA, it's a bit more complex. Finance to DVA, it's not that complex because a lot of the foundation of DVA is based in finances. The third one is probably the hardest because they need to put on both caps. They need to almost approach it from both ends, right? So the ops, product, and strategy from a business perspective, the knowledge areas or things that they need to add to their base is firstly around data foundations. They need to understand the basics around data, what data is, and most people that have gone through data literacy courses or those type of things understand this. We almost go a bit beyond that because we focus on data confidence. So it's not just about the data, but also the ability for data to create value for your business that needs to be considered. So that's the first one, data foundations. The second one is around measurement design, right? So when you're implementing something, what measurements are you implementing alongside it to make sure that you can measure it from day one, and that you don't have this issue where a year later you have to go back, figure out what that measurement was supposed to be, and then try to retrofit it to get to an answer in terms of what they expected or actual value was that was realized from the investment, if any. So that is really around understanding how to build KPIs, how to do a bit of basic financial modeling, and how do you build this measurement into your processes within the business at the end of the day. And then the third one there is just the governance basics. And this is, again, not governance by death by forum or death by council. This is really understanding that you have formal practices in place to manage and orchestrate governance within your value pipeline. And this is to make sure that you realize value and that you can provide value assurance. Now, that last bit, value assurance, is very important because value assurance is really the thing that the DVA actually does. So if you need to sort of tell people in 2 words what a DVA does, it's value assurance, right? So it's relatively simple, relatively easy. Now, taking that into consideration, so we've now looked at data analytics professionals, we've looked at finance, and we've looked at it from a business perspective, either from ops, product, or strategy point of view. Something that all 3 of those areas need to have in common when you now position. And now you need to pay attention, and you need to either create a list for this somewhere where you can go and tick it, because we're going to leave you with a question towards the end of the session that you need to be able to answer, is around the skill stack for the DVA. So firstly, the DVA needs to be able to frame value. So value framing is very important because the DVA needs to understand what the context of value is within your business and organization, as well as within the context in which value needs to be realized, right? So for instance, if you're sitting with a data analytics solution in a specific environment within a large organization, value being realized there plays a bit of a role in terms of the big organization as well, and will also be influenced by the organization and their decisions and sort of the way that they operate. If we're thinking about manufacturing companies as an example, cost becomes a big thing. So value framing within those companies will typically be focused on cost. The second skill there is around decision mapping. At which point do we make what decisions needs to be made on the things that we are getting from, what decisions have the highest impact to the business, which decisions have medium impact and low impact, which decisions requires additional work in order to be achieved, which decisions can be automated. So really understanding how do you map the decisions from your data analytics and AI investments or solutions to get to a point of decision, either automated or business-wise. The third one is around benefits logic. Now, this is where you need to clearly articulate or be able to classify value from a determinate versus indeterminate perspective. And if it's determinate, what type of determinate value if it is, and if it's indeterminate, what type of indeterminate value it would be, right? So indeterminate would typically be the warm, fuzzy feelings, like we are going to increase the overall well-being of our employees if we implement this, right? So that's it's a nice thing. It's not really 100% measurable, but it is, there's some indeterminate measures that you can start building out from it. Determinate value is, if we're going to do this, we're going to increase revenue by X. So really relatively easy. So understanding that benefits logic is very important. The fourth skill that needs to be added or that needs to be present within the DVA is that of KPI design. You need to be able to frame KPIs, create KPIs, from the point that you've created your value generating initiatives all the way through to measuring that value at the end of the day and assigning those KPIs to business, to IT, and to the data teams in order to track them and make sure that they're accountable. The next bit is sort of where the finance hat comes in, is being able to do commercial case building. So building a commercial case for investment to say, this is what we need in order. So business, for instance, let's use an example. We need to increase our revenue by $100 million by means of our online e-commerce site. Obviously, there's additional analytics, additional things that's required for that. So you go and build out that commercial case to say this is the investment required, so that you can actually run the right interventions to get to that $100 million uplift within your e-commerce space, right? So commercial case building, very important. The more difficult part for the DVA is adoption and change management, right? So getting people to actually use the solutions that was delivered, making sure that solutions are actually embedded and entrenched back into the organization. That's where it becomes a bit more difficult. And what we typically do here is we will pair a data value architect with a very strong project manager to help them orchestrate just some of that value enablement stuff with the relevant teams. Because, you know, people always say it takes a village, you know, value takes a company. Everyone should be concerned about value at the end of the day. The last four are not that difficult. These are just basic things that most roles currently already have today. One is having governance basics in place. And this is not just data governance. This is around finance governance, project governance, etc. So you need to be able to understand the basic things around when you're asking for investment or asking for monies in order to make an investment. What's the governance process that you need to follow within your own organization to tick those necessary boxes? When you're delivering on value, what's the governance around that? When you're doing the realization of value and the improvement of value, what's the governance going to look like within that scenario? One that might be a bit difficult for some individuals would be the narrative or the executive storytelling. You know, now pivoting from we need to invest in this solution because it's got agentic AI and it can do stuff that we usually paid people to do. That's not how you tell stories to executives. That's how you chase hype and create problems for yourself down the line. So the narrative around executive storytelling is very important. It's how do you frame what you need to do in such a sense that all executives around the table understand why they need to trust the investment and why do they need to support the initiative at hand in terms of what needs to happen. And this means sometimes speaking finance to finance people, business to business people, and data to data folks. So you really need to be able to pivot between those three spheres of conversation. Then you need to be able to facilitate things, you know, facilitate sessions, facilitate resolution of issues, facilitate improvement, whatever it might be. It's being able to facilitate things between interdisciplinary teams. And then the last one, but not the least, and probably the most important one, is being able to negotiate or negotiation. Is you are going to be in a situation where you're going to have to negotiate with people the whole time. And probably the best example of why you need negotiation is your team has now gone and they've built, or your team, let's call it the data team, have now built a really nice data analytics model that they believe will improve the management of churn within your organization. And this now needs to be embedded back into systems as well as into business processes. Now the DVA needs to negotiate priorities with the IT teams to say at which point will they be allowed, or do they have capacity to affect this change within the system? And will they be able to do it for free, or do they need to charge for it? And if they charge for it, what's the best rate for it? The same with the business processes. So negotiation becomes a very big tool within the skill set of the DVA skill stack. So I'm just going to quickly list those 10 again. It's value framing, decision mapping, benefits logic, KPI design, commercial case building, adoption/change management, governance basics, the narrative and executive storytelling, facilitation and negotiation. Now, Mags, all of these things are wonderful. It's great to talk about what the DVA can do and what the DVA needs. And I'm sure a lot of people listening today just want to change their careers immediately into that of a DVA. Can you be the voice of reason and give us our weekly reality check, please? Thank you.
Sure. Jean, a lot of thoughts came up while you were speaking regarding how I've seen people trying to change in the past years, trying to grow into a specific business role, making a specific impact. What I've seen though is that people in the data native environment struggle to go into the data value architect role is where they get so fixated on the technology that comes around the corner again. Tomorrow there's another technology, and they get kind of stuck in this technology hype, and instead of going towards the data value and the value generation for the business, where they should shift their heads totally into terms of that, making that impact in business. On the other side, you've got people in business and in finance and in operations, and getting them into the environment is always into the DVA role. They tend to see data and analytics as a byproduct of their operations and of their work, where actually it should be the solution to a lot of the problems. And I like to focus on the solution, because out of the solution comes the value. And you have to frame your work in terms of a solution to a particular problem. And that's often a big challenge, because I see it as something on the side that will give me a dashboard to make things better, and actually it's not. On the other side, what I've also realized through the past year being actively a DVA is that a DVA can't stand alone. And you've mentioned it earlier, where we pair up project managers with DVA. It really takes a village. You have to be with change managers or with other DVAs to work together in an organization to bring that change. It's just the one person hears something different to the other person, and together you actually bring that value to life in the business. And then lastly, you've mentioned it at the beginning, is the mandate. It's very, very important for a DVA to have the mandate of making of value or generating value. Because if you don't have that mandate, then people might see you still as your data person or still as your ops person. You have to have the mandate so people can listen to you out of the value ear as well, so that they can enable that value with you into the business. I think that can be a big stumbling block if you don't have that mandate.
Awesome. Thanks, Max. So I think just in closing or wrapping up for today, I think the key message here is, if we just quickly highlight them, you can pivot your career into that of a DVA, but it will require a significant amount of effort. So one is you're going to have to gain some experience. It's not going to be an overnight thing, and the more experience you open yourself up to, the better. So at least we've sort of highlighted, if you want in one of those three areas and you need to pivot, what are the things you need to focus on, as well as what's supposed to be in the tool set of the DVA. The second thing that we looked at was don't just assume that you can just step into the role of DVA if you don't have that formal mandate and backing and those type of things, because the DVA is somebody that contracts back into senior management to deliver value and realize value. And without that mandate, you're really going to have a hard time to really get things across the board, right? So it's something that needs to be there, and maybe a conversation that you need to have with your line managers or executives to say, listen, I'm open to this role. I think this is the impact that we can have. Can you provide me the support and the mandate that I need to start assuming this role over a period of time, right? Because it's better to sort of ease into it than get into it. I think the fun bit that I want to sort of say here is, you can always have a junior DVA or a senior DVA, but a DVA should almost always be senior. So if you don't have more than 5 years worth of experience within an organization, that's typically the size of the one that you're currently in, and you want to assume the role of the DVA within that one organization, you're really going to struggle. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It's just real life experience and industry experience that's come in handy. And then just the last bit then here is it's really good to make that pivot and understand what you need to do and get to it at the end point of the day. The one thing that the DVA really needs to focus on is that of the data value assurance framework, which is what we'll be talking about next week. So the challenge for this week is look at your current environment, consider your current role, and reflect on the skill stack that we've mentioned today. If we look at those 10 things that we've listed, determine what additional skills you would need to acquire to pivot into that DVA as a viable career option, right? So people always say, what is what are you planning for 2026? What are the things you want to focus on? If you want to focus on pivoting into a DVA, look at that list of 10 things, look at the things that you want to gain more experience in, and see how you can open up opportunities for yourself in terms of where you are to maybe build some of those skills over the next 12 months. So next week, we'll be covering data value assurance steps. And this is important, right? So if you've missed the previous sessions, I strongly suggest you play catch up and listen to today's one until the end, because we've now laid the foundation around what the DVA is, what does the role of the DVA do, what does a week in the life of the DVA look like, how do you pivot your career into a DVA. Now we're getting into the nuts and bolts, into the machine itself, around understanding what the data value assurance framework is, what those steps are. And we're going to unpack that in a lot of detail. And this is effectively the tool that enables the DVA to deliver value within the organization. So thank you for listening today. Check out the other episodes. This is part 4 of part 8. We still have 4 more impactful sessions to go. Max, thanks as always. Hope to see everyone next week. Cheers.